Rebel. Reject. Create.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to Rebel, Reject, Create. And today, my guest joining me all the way from an equally cool London is Mr. David McQueen. And David is passionate about developing leaders. He's an executive coach, he's a speaker, he's a facilitator, a mentor, and a founder. And we are going to be speaking to him today about the intersection of all of that with change and creativity. And in particular, I'm very keen to talk about diversity in all of its forms. So welcome, David.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I think I'm going to take you as my wingman wherever I go after that kind of introduction. But thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Good. I thought it was about time we had another David on the show. So
yes. Quality.
Yeah. Right now, the world is changing at an incredible rate of knots. Yes. And I think most people aren't really mentally, psychologically equipped for that. How do you deal with it in your line of work when you're coaching and mentoring?
It's a tough one. And I like to deal with it on an individual basis, but it is a tough one because, as you said, change is happening so quickly, technologically, socially, economically. There are so many things that people are buffering up against. But I think the big thing for me that really stands out is taking that moment to breathe. And when I say breathe, it can be so overwhelming. But when we just take that moment to go, right, okay, where am I right now? Where do I want to get to? And how do I get there to the best of my ability? I get clients who I mentor or coach, and we just have that moment to just breathe. And I just go, look, how are you? How really are you? How you doing? How's your family? How are your hobbies? How are you sleeping? Are you drinking all right? Sometimes my clients are looking at me like, okay, why are you getting up in my business? Why are you asking me these questions? But it's amazing when you get to that space when it becomes quite personal. And obviously with an element, you're building trust. There is something where you realize that some of the anxieties or some of the challenges that people have, it's not just with the work, it just sits in that space because we're having all those conversations in our head about what could go wrong, what's happening, and how do I manage that? And so being able to take that moment to pause and to breathe gives us a really good starting point to at least get a bit of clarity and then think about how do we make a way or a plan or a strategy or a roadmap to go step by step, how they can take ownership and agency while all those changes are happening.
You've just used a couple of my favorite words there, make, first of all, and then ownership and agency.
Yeah.
These are not concepts that I think a lot of people are familiar with applying to themselves, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that's the biggest thing you need to overcome in your work?
Yeah. Sense of self and self-awareness are huge. I was actually writing an article today about how we manage conflict. And, I think it's a crucial part of the communication toolkit as to how we approach conflict. And very often, individuals, when they think about conflict, they think about disagreements and tension between other people. But for me, a big part of managing conflict is the internal conflict we're having in our mind as to how we show up and how we present and how people may perceive us.
Yeah.
For me, it's getting that first, that sense of self-awareness of my value. Who am I? Am I an imposter? Am I not good enough? Am I, what's all this stuff going on in my head? And so that big piece around self-awareness is important. And that's coming back to the point I make. That's why I ask those questions, because it is getting that sense of how much power do I have over my destiny? How much power do I have over the way that I navigate myself and my life and my work? And giving yourself permission, and I think that's important, but giving yourself permission and forgiving yourself when you haven't given yourself permission, be in that space is incredibly powerful.
Right. I mean, what I love about the terminology you're using here is that you're saying in a very kind of business-like, professional way, essentially you can create your own future.
100%.
Right.
100%.
But most people don't think they're creative. So that's why I like so much the way that you're saying it, because you're not saying, hey, you can just make that stuff up. It's just a big fantasy and off we go and you can have whatever you want, a la The Secret.
Yes. Which is not a secret. Yeah.
Right. How does that actually work, though, for ordinary people?
So I love this again, as you said, that the misunderstanding around creative and being creative. I remember I a few years back, I joined a private members club in the UK, and the framing around it, or the resistance that I had to join it, was that it was aimed at creatives. And I was like, oh, why would I be in here? I do this leadership stuff. And then I sat down and I thought, hold on a minute. I'm creating courses. I'm doing brand designing for myself. Outside of my regular course of work, I've got individuals who are going, right, Dave, I know you love this branding and positioning because I see you do it with all your products and stuff. So tell me about this. What's the brand toolkit that you use? What's the typography that you use? What's the kind of sound and flavor you're looking for? And it really dawned on me that I do this anyway as part of my work. But
Right.
the reason why a lot of people push back against or don't take ownership of this thing around being creative is because they only think of it in the artistic sense.
Right.
Am I the photographer? Am I the painter? Am I the sculptor? Whereas for me, the imagination and imagining things and seeing how you can be aware of a customer or a client or a person's needs, for me, that is incredibly powerful creative, because you're creating something in your head. And even though somebody may have done something similar before, you're bringing your own flavor to it. And
Right.
when I had that aha moment, I put that into my practice. And when people say to me, oh, I'm not very creative, I'm like, I will fight you in the
Yeah.
streets. Don't tell me that you're not creative. What does
Oh,
that mean? So yeah, it is important, again, to not get people to think that they can do anything that they want to, because I don't believe in that, right? Let's go within the realm of your skills, talents, and abilities. Dream big, but don't be stupid. But
right.
then start thinking about how do we then use those skills to have more imagineering, to think about how you put your stamp on it and how you bring it how you bring that to reality.
Right. I mean, just the process of solving a problem is creative, right? Because
100%.
you have to be creative because there is no answer. That's the whole point. You have to make one.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
100%. And I've seen, as I said, to your point, I've seen individuals who would say that they're right brained. I have a good friend, he's really a wizard on Excel, like just
Yeah.
amazing. And I say to him, do you actually realize what you're doing here?
Yeah.
When you're going behind and doing all these nested what if statements and macros and coloring and the conditional formatting, I said, you're being creative. No, no, I'm just doing my job. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I will fight you. I have a tendency to threaten people with fighting, metaphorically.
That's right. I'll be your wingman. I'm in on that fight.
Yeah.
Um, Now, one of the things from my perspective that is absolutely critical in
Mm,
dealing with change and being creative and getting ourselves out of this situation that we're in globally and economically and
mm.
socially is diversity.
Yes.
Now, from my perspective, as a highly creative person, I, I can see how that's really, really important on so many different levels. But I'd really like to hear it from you
Mm.
because apart from the kind of general diversity, of course, you do a lot of work with dealing with diversity and prejudice and racism. So, how do all of those things fit together?
Yeah. So one of the things I will say about diversity is I think it's gotten a really bad rap.
Agreed.
And what it is there are times where I've veered away from using the actual term, because you just know with people's heuristics what lens they view it through
Yep.
and how they only see it as being woke or leftish or weak or what have you.
Yeah.
But for me, the diversity itself is being able to go, have you truly considered the impact of the choices and the decisions that you make? That is it for me, what diversity is. It really, when I talk about diversity or inclusion, it really comes down to decision making. So,
Right.
very quick example, the Women's World Cup at the moment going on, mixed bag around how it's reporting. That's a whole other conversation for another podcast, right? But something has come out that the football boots that have been designed for women by Nike and Adidas, the two biggest firms, they're designed specifically for men's feet. And so
Wait.
what it means is that a lot of women who are playing football are ended up with ACL injuries because the boots are not designed for women. For me, that's a no-brainer.
Wait. So
That
wait. Women's football boots are just men's football boots in a different range of sizes.
Yes,
No way.
yeah, because women's bodies are shaped differently.
Yeah.
And you think about it, like cars in the main are designed for men. The
Yeah. The whole
average,
seatbelt
whatever,
thing. Yeah.
seat belts,
Lethal for women.
the distance between the pedals and all that stuff, the whole design of it is just, so when women have accidents, a car accident, they tend to have more injuries or fatalities because it's not designed with that in consideration. And so there are individuals who will go, well, the cost of being able to do that is high. And I'm like, half of the population in the world, you're trying to tell me that what you're thinking about is this small unit cost, where in the long term, you know you're going to make margins anyway. You know you're going to make money. So who's sitting in those rooms who are making decisions around the product design that allows those individuals to be able to participate in a global phenomenon, but to the best of their ability?
Yeah.
And why, when you're putting yourself out there as one of the leading brands around sports, and why are you not accommodating for that? And, you know, capitalism, right? We know that there are lots of individuals that will speak about that. But there's one thing there's a thing that's been going in my heart for this year, especially when I talk about this. And it comes from the Hippocratic Oath that the doctors take. Yeah. And I can't remember the Latin, but the English interpretation is, firstly, do no harm.
Yeah.
I love that. You when you go to do work, your intention is if what I'm doing, am I reducing harm? And if you're just surrounded with individuals who think like you, look like you, behave like you, and it's quite homogenous, how are you going to have pushback against individuals who will say to you, look, have we considered X?
Yeah.
And so for me, there are going to be some spaces where that diversity needs to look like cross cultures, cross ethnicities, cross race. There are some times when that needs to look like ability. There are some times where that needs to look like gender, or any other of those represented groups, where you're going, if we really want to make the impact and reduce harm, we need to widen the repertoire so our decision-making is more powerful. Yeah. And that, for me, is at the essence of it. When you think of diversity and inclusion, it's, are we making the best decisions that reduce harm? And once you start from that, all those other things fall into place.
Right.
The pushback people have is people start with, oh my God, are we doing this for Black people? Oh my God, are we doing this for women? And I'm like, no. That's a really, if you want to bring people on board, you don't want to put up negative barriers straight away. You go, here's our decision making, here's the process we've got, and here are some gaps. How do we fill that gap properly and not just a tick box, so that we make sure that when we're going through this process of creating and designing and building and sense making of the world, we've done it with consideration for the largest amount of stakeholders possible.
Yeah. Reminds me of that whole thing about 35 millimeter camera film being shocking at reproducing black skins. Just didn't have the capacity to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's crazy, right? I'm like, you know, the Google Pixel camera is the best camera for like standard, but I've got a bloody iPhone. I don't want a Google Pixel camera. So what does that look like unless I have to go through, do the filters, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, to your point, who's sitting in that room making the decision?
Right. And how do we change that? I mean, what are the concrete steps that anybody who's watching this or listening to this can say to themselves, well, I can do something about that? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah. So again, I think there's a beautiful book that I've had, and I always recommend it to my coaching clients. I'm going to forget the author's name, but it's called Power Questions. And it's a belief that I have. You get a really good answer, the better the question that you ask.
Yeah. Market research 101.
Oh my goodness, right?
Yeah.
It's so much around, let's ask the question, not to get the answer we want, but to ask the question that we need.
Right. Yeah.
That for me is powerful.
Yeah.
Like I think about my daughters, you know, when they were growing up, they're like, Dad, can I have £10? And I'm like, yeah. Yeah, you can. And then they're looking at me and they're like, oh my God, no, I know I need to ask a different question. Okay. Like, Dad, I need £10 because I need to go out and buy X. Okay, fine. And what do you need it for? And then we go through that process of questions. And by the time they've got to question 4, they're tired. They're like, Dad, you're just making me tired. I know you're probably going to give me the money or something, but you're just really making me tired. And all I wanted to do was get them into the habit of going, how do we ask better questions?
Right.
Because when we do that, we set the expectations, right?
Yeah.
So whether we're looking at it from a commercial or even a personal point of view, for me, there's something powerful about thinking about the questions that we ask. And how do we do it? And I love how a lot of people and organizations are really focused on sustainability. Some aren't. I love the fact that a lot are. How do we employ practices that are sustainable? So say, for example, we're talking about creativity. There are a lot of artists and individuals who I know who I've mentored and spoken to, and they're like, Dave, it's just really so hard out here and what have you, get this done. And I'm like, okay, what do you need to survive? And they go, right, this is what I need. I need 50 grand. I go, okay. And what do you need to thrive? And they go, thrive? I go, oh, 90 grand. And I go, okay, there's a 40,000 pound gap here. What do we need to put in place to make sure that you can still be true to what it is that you're doing, but still have the space to thrive? Well, what do you mean, Dave? Also, I'm an artist. You've got this thing, you've got this main thing, and people will pay thousands for it. What about prints? What do you mean prints? Yeah, you can have a reprint of the original artwork, and somebody can be able to go and do that, and you just take off some of the margin on it, and somebody is able to buy it for your e-commerce store. Oh my God, can I do that? Yeah, people are doing it all the time. What about limited editions? So you know that you've only got 405, that creates a buffer for you. You can go back and still do your artwork, but you create that demand, and people come in and they buy the limited edition because there's only 10 of them in the world and it cannot be replicated, and that's it. And then they're like, I never thought of that. And I go, yes, because you didn't ask that question.
Yeah, because
You
an
never asked
artist's
that question.
experience is also so not diverse, right? They're locked up in their little tower doing their own little thing and maybe speaking to their mates who are doing a similar thing. And
Yeah,
these conversations just don't happen.
100%. And framing it around surviving and thriving,
Hmm.
a lot of people don't really think about it. But you know, there. I always say to my artist friends is that being a hungry artist is overrated.
Totally.
Being a hungry artist is overrated. Okay, get yourself some food. And what does that mean between surviving and thriving? And just framing it around those questions, you can just see the light bulb moment go off. And you don't have to be this extreme capitalist, but you are just then thinking, okay, what does that do to give me not only bandwidth financially, but give me bandwidth around my anxiety and my stress and
Yeah.
all the other things that will come when I'm just thinking about surviving.
Yeah. Because all of those things will end up short circuiting their creativity in the long
Oh,
term.
100%.
You know,
100%.
everyone thinks, oh, the tortured, agonized artist is necessary to make great art.
Yeah, yeah.
In the short term, maybe it works, but it doesn't work long term.
No, no, no. And again, you know, for me, whatever you choose to do in your work, it should still be in a space where possible. And I'm really considerate of my privilege and where I am and how I
Yeah.
work and location and what have you. But when you have that choice to be in a space where it aligns with you to have your living your best life. And so your work is an extension of your skills and your talents and your gifts, but it should not be something that hinders you holistically from living your best life.
I love that. I love that. I mean, there's just so many myths that get in the way of all of that. The struggle, the being broke, the being somewhat crazy, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's overrated. And I said, and I'm checking my privilege here, right? I am, you know, I was born in a middle class family where my parents were very aspirational. I've always been surrounded by individuals who, and I've obviously, even though I've been through my hard times, was homeless once, lost my business, and all the rest of it, I still had a bank of individuals and experiences that allowed me to bounce back. So I'm really, really conscious of that. But that's why I say, having been through that, I ask the questions to individuals to go, there are options. There are ways of looking at it differently. And if there are ways that I can help and others can help, take those opportunities rather than being a martyr.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a very big difference between being a tortured artist because you've come from absolutely nothing and day-to-day existence is torture,
Yes.
and effectively behaving in a way which guarantees that torture because you think it's appropriate to this activity.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Um, I wanted to ask you also about leadership in general.
Mm.
I mean, if you scroll through LinkedIn today,
Yes.
you're going to see so much stuff about it.
Yeah.
So much that one's got to think to oneself, this can't all be great, good, or
Mm.
there's just so much stuff.
Yes.
What are the core key things that, from your perspective, leadership should be doing and thinking about right now?
Yeah. So firstly, I think that leadership should be systemic rather than individual.
Mhm.
There should be a system that upholds wherever leadership shows up in the organization. And too often, the narratives around leadership tend to focus just on the individual. And
Hmm.
you get these kind of false binaries of a leader is great, a manager or a boss is pants. And I'm like,
Right.
dude, you cannot be a leader without a manager or a boss. You just cannot, especially in larger organizations. But even when we're thinking of individuals who are showing leadership in a community, there has to be a system. Because if there isn't a system, where does the accountability come? How, when you are taking people on a specific journey, how are you going to be able to take them there? And so for me, there has to be, first and foremost, there has to be a system. And that system should say, when somebody is leading either in a situation or when they're leading, generally taking an organization or a department in a direction, that there are certain pillars that will make sure that that leadership is doing the job that it's supposed to do. So let me give you two examples if I can. On the one hand, very often people think of leadership only in the senior role, somebody who's here who's going to be managing the money, a business unit, managing, hiring people and what have you, and taking them on this organization, which is cool. And I think sometimes that works. But sometimes I think that's misinterpreted. Sometimes I think people are just really good individual contributors. They have no either talent, gift, and let's keep it real. Everybody says anyone could be a leader. I'm like, that's trash. Not anyone could be. I can't be a top leading goal scorer for the UK. As much as I want to, I can't. That's just not in my skill set. So let me work within my skill set. However, there are some other areas where you can demonstrate. For example, think about a fire warden. If you're in an organization, no matter what your seniority is in that organization, if the building is on fire, the person who's in position of leadership at that point in time is the fire warden. They say, leave your things, put everything down, go out to the stairs on the side, do not run, make your way down, look at my whistle, look at my yellow jacket. I don't care who you are. Let's go and meet and assemble at the fire point outside. Because if you don't, you're going to be burnt to a crisp. And for me, that is a definitive example of leadership because the system's in place. You're not messing with the fire warden.
Doesn't matter who that is.
Right. You're not messing with the fire warden. And although there may be some resistance or what have you, and people, who I am, the fact is that at that point in time, the leader in that situation is the fire warden. And so for me, the system being in place is more important than the individual. The individual has to slot into that because if I go and if I leave that organization as a fire warden, if there's a system in place, somebody else should be able to come in and do the same job.
Right.
Likewise, even if I'm leading a brilliant company or a department, if I leave, everything flounders and it just goes to because you've just been focusing on me as a person rather than what the system and what we're trying to develop as a culture, then leadership is. So for me, it's systemic, if that makes sense.
It makes. I mean, I've never thought about it like that. It makes a lot of. I mean, that's the difference between a sustainable business model and a non-sustainable cult of personality.
100%.
David, it's been awesome talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For all of you who've listening here, I'm going to share the links where you can get hold of Mr. McQueen online. Please do go and check him out and his work. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Rebel, Reject, Create, don't forget to hit the like, follow buttons. Drop us a comment. We'll happily answer any questions and look out for the next episode. And remember to rebel against the status quo, reject your own prejudices and biases, and create the room for you to create whatever the hell you want. Until next time. Thanks, David.
Thank you.